They were not forced. They were not coerced. They sealed the tomb with their own hands and sang as the stone was lowered. In 1933, 17 nuns entered a convent on the outskirts of Warsaw. None of them were ever seen again. The land has overgrown, pulled back into itself. What remains of the grass is pale and wiry, brittle to the touch. Trees bow inward from the north side, their trunks warped like they leaned too long toward something that never moved at the center of the field, where the wind forgets to blow, is where it stood. The convent, its name has been lost. Locals once called it Scuba Maki, the mother's ruin, but no parish ever claimed it. No church recorded its funding, and even among the clergy, few admit to knowing where it was. Still, the stone remained old stone, smooth by cold, the kind quarried by hand, been buried beneath frost, as if trying to hide dot. It was built on a plot once deemed unsuitable for burial. Soil too soft, too wet, bodies shifted, graves collapsed. No one tried again. Yet in 1897, without permit or public record, a convent appeared. No procession, no ribbon, just scaffolding one week and a completed bell tower the next. There were no graves surrounding it, no chapel cross, no garden, just silence, and a bell rope that no one ever saw pulled. It rang only at dusk, one note, slow, measured. It never changed. The bell was made of black iron dull and matte, without markings. A survivor from a nearby village once claimed it had no clapper, that it shouldn't have rung at all, but it did. Every evening at the same time for 26 years. The structure itself was narrow, too narrow. It rose awkwardly, stone over stone, without symmetry. The windows were wrong, some sealed shut from the inside, others opened into staircases that led nowhere. There were no visible doors, only an archway, sunken, shadowed, wide enough for a person to enter, but not tall enough to exit standing. Those who approached reported feeling watched, even when alone, especially when alone. One farmer, a widower named Stefan, passed it each week while delivering grain to a neighboring parish. He kept to the edge of the field, eyes down, horse silent, but just once he looked. He said the curtains were moving. There was no wind. The fabric was too heavy. He claimed dark velvet or sackcloth, something not meant to shift. And behind the glass, something pale, not a face, not quite, just the suggestion of breath, and then it was gone. He never took that route again. Others tried. Curiosity, mostly. Local children. On dares. One boy, Matu, swore he saw a woman in white walking barefoot around the structure. Her head was bowed. Her arms were folded under her habit. But what frightened him was her pace. She never stopped. He watched for nearly half an hour, frozen in the wheat. She made no sound, no footprint, and she never turned. Her path looped perfectly around the building, again and again. And when he finally fled, he realized something else. She hadn't blinked, in fact. She hadn't looked up at all. No records list any sisterhood active at that location. No letters from Rome, no. Statements of occupancy, the nearest. Parish, 23 kilometers east, reported no knowledge of the structure. When asked in 1912, the presiding bishop referred to it only as a place of silence, and then refused to speak further. But the bell continued to toll, one note low every dusk, even in winter, even when snow buried the archway, even when there were no tracks in or out. Priest named Father Michael attempted to bless the grounds in 1909, a formal consecration. He arrived with water, incense, and a young acolyte. They did not enter. They never found the door, but they reported a sound from beneath the ground. Not movement, not voices, just rhythm, like footsteps in reverse, slower than breath. He marked the site in his journal, called it an architecture of absence. A chapel with no congregation, a house of God without. God. No funerals were ever held there, no sacraments, no processions, just the ringing of the bell, and a silence that never changed. But something wasn't Right in 1933, the bell stopped. There was no chime that evening, or the next, or the one after, and for a while, the field felt lighter, the air less thick, until someone noticed the stone was gone. The entire convent vanished, no rubble, no trace. Only the bell tower's outline remained burnt into the grass in a ring darker than soil. Locals said the silence felt different after that more deliberate and if you stood long enough where the bell tower once rose, you could feel something underfoot, not stone, earth, just hollow. Understood. Here's the fully expanded script for Chapter 2, The 17 Sisters, written precisely in the tone, structure, and pacing of a liturgy of fear. Duration. Target word count, approximately 1260. It was the year the frost didn't leave. Until June, the soil had refused to thaw. Wheat roots withered in the ground, and the air, even at midday, carried the taste of metal. That's when they arrived, 17 women, all in white. No carriage. No escort. Just the distant outline of movement. Through the trees, like a procession performed for no audience, they came on foot, single file, along the tree line east of the abandoned convent. There was no road, no path, but they moved like they'd been there before, like they remembered something no one else could. Each woman wore the same habit-simple linen, unmarked, pale. Their hands were soaked with dirt, though no one saw rain that day, and each of them held the same object, a hymnal, identical in size and color, dark blue, unbound, without inscription. Except for the one who walked at the front, her book was closed with twine. She walked slower than the rest, as if measuring her steps to match something unseen. And behind her, two of the younger sisters carried a wooden crate. It was sealed. No hinges. No handle, but it took both of them to lift it. A local shepherd saw them pass from the far hill. He said they made no sound, that their shoes didn't crunch the frost, that the birds had stopped mid. Song until they vanished beneath the bell tower. The convent had been empty for over a year. No smoke from the chimney, no mail, no one seen entering or leaving since the bell went silent. But that night, the light returned. Not candles, not gas. Something colder. Window by window, a pale white glow like moonlight, only brighter. And it didn't flicker. No documentation lists their names. No convent registry. No baptismal records. No order from Rome. Only a note unsigned delivered to the diocese in Krakow the following week. It stated simply, "The Sisters of the Silence have returned." It was dated 3 days before their arrival. The bishop dismissed it as a prank until he noticed the signature, a woman's name, written only once, Mother A. No surname. No title, just a single letter and a blot of ink beneath it. Attempts were made to investigate. Officials from the local prefecture were dispatched to inquire. None were allowed inside. The door was opened only wide enough to speak. And the voice that answered was wrong. Not impolite, not threatening. Just too calm, too practiced, like she'd been waiting to recite it. They said the same thing each time. "We are in prayer. Return in 7 days." They never did, not because they were turned away, but because they didn't want to return. One guard, young, conscripted, reported something strange. On the third night after their arrival, he watched from the slope behind the convent, where the chapel roof dipped into the earth. There was movement. Not inside, but under the stone. He described it as pulsing. Not shaking. Not footsteps. Just a slow, steady rise and fall, like breath, like the building was exhaling. He resigned the next morning. The crate they carried was never brought out again. No records state what became of it. No one saw. It moved inside. But a delivery clerk, years later, claimed to have entered briefly on church business. He said the chapel floor was bare. No altar, no pews, only a circle, painted on the stone in white ash. And in the center, something square, draped in cloth. He wasn't allowed to approach. He was handed a sealed envelope and asked to leave. He never opened it, but he did keep the envelope, and when it was examined decades later, the paper inside was blank dot except for a pressed flower, white bell dot dot shaped petals, too brittle to name, and something else, written faintly on the inside flap. We sing only when we forget. The sisters never left the building. Again, dot not once, not even in summer, dot not for food, dot for mass. Yet the bells resumed dot each dusk. One chimed out low and slow, but different this time got slower dot, and not always at the same. Hour dot sometimes at 6:12, sometimes at 7:01. Once only, once at 3:33 a dot m. Dot no one spoke to the sisters, dot no one saw them outside, except one, a boy named Kakber, age 10, wandered too close during harvest. He said he heard humming, like a lullaby, but wrong dot, not in pitch dot in shape. He described it as a melody with no middle, one that started, then folded in on itself, and ended before it finished. He didn't speak again for months. When he finally did, he wrote a single phrase in charcoal on the wall of his room. Her mouth didn't open. One of the sisters had seen him dot. She was standing in the grass, facing the wheat dot, smiling dot, but her lips hadn't moved. And still, he heard the song. Word of the sisters began to fade after that dot. The war came, and with it, fire and silence. Many assumed the convent had been destroyed, but aerial surveys taken in 1946 show the building intact, still standing, still casting shadow. One frame, now missing from the archives, allegedly showed a figure in white on the roof, hands folded, face turned toward. The east dot connects to her. A second shadow, longer, stretched, unnaturally against the stone, but with no body to cast it. The sisters were never declared missing, because no one ever claimed they were real, and the woman who signed the letter Mother A was never seen again. But if you visit the archives, if you look closely at the back of that envelope, beneath the stamp, there's a seal, pressed so faintly it's almost invisible, a triangle, 3 thorns, and at its center, a tiny inverted bell dot certainly. Below is the fully expanded voiceover dot 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 ready cinematic horror script for Chapter 3, the prayer they invented, written in the exact tone, rhythm, and structure used in Liturgy of Fear dot 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 style storytelling. Target word count, (1,260 dot snow had not yet fallen, but the sky had been white for weeks, now it pressed low against the hills, colorless, muffled, like something draped over the world. The trees at the edge of the village had stopped growing. Even the animals, crows, wolves, even stray dogs had vanished. And yet, every evening, a sound returned, not the bell they were used to. A second one dot smaller dot thinner dot. Wrong dot. It didn't strike on the hour like the convent's old bronze. This one came at uneven moments, 5:41, then 8:03, then again at 6:06. Never the same. Never explained dot, and always followed by something worse. A voice, but not a voice. Not in any human register dot. It was deeper than chant, but not solemn. Repetitive, but not rhythmical. The kind of sound that tricked the ear, made you think it came from behind the wall, or beneath the floorboards. No one inside the convent was ever seen singing, but the voice kept returning, and it began to change. Villagers first heard it faintly, at a distance, just a sound like wind, moving through reeds dot, but by the second week, it grew stronger dot, more structured, dot, almost like a song, a chant maybe, but the cadence didn't match any known mass, dot. It began dot, paused, then repeated, the same way, but with a small difference. Then again, slightly altered dot, each loop drew closer to itself, and further from understanding. One woman, elderly, nearly deaf, claimed she heard words, not Polish, not Latin dot, something else, something older. She said it reminded her of the lullabies her grandmother whispered before sleep, only reversed, as if someone had unspooled them from memory and folded the notes back in on themselves. The priest from the neighboring parish tried to investigate dot. Father Joseph dot he stood outside the convent on the third night of Advent, windless, cold, his breath curling in the air, and then he heard it, a single line sung by many voices, but layered, slightly out of time with each other, as if every singer was a second behind the last dot. It wasn't melodic, it was recursive. The prayer didn't build, it spiraled, like a staircase you couldn't descend. He described it later as the sound of a soul being reminded of itself. But something wasn't right. He returned the next day and noticed the bell rope was missing. It had been cut from inside. And in its place, woven through the small wooden slot where the bell's pull should be, was a braid of human hair. 17 strands. Bound in red thread. He didn't report it. Not to the church. Not to the diocese. Only in his private notes, discovered decades later in a drawer beneath his cot, where the final line read, "It isn't prayer, it's remembering." That same week, a boy age 7 was found outside the convent's north wall. Alone. Unconscious. His family had thought he was missing, but he had no injuries. No sign of frostbite, and his ears were bleeding. Not from trauma. From overuse. As if he'd been listening to something too long. When he woke, he whispered something. Over and over, not in fear, in rhythm. 7 words, the same 7 words, but always in a different order. Each time he spoke, they rearranged. Always the same syllables. Always a different pattern. The villagers tried to write them down, but the order changed before they could finish. They gave up. And the boy stopped speaking entirely by spring. The convent remained quiet. After that. Or appeared to. No more bells. No more song. But at dusk, if you stood far enough up the hill, you could still hear it. Low. Like a murmur beneath the dirt. Like breath caught in stone. One woman, Maria Dembeck, said she began hearing it in her dreams. A single note. Held longer than breath allows. Sometimes sharp. Sometimes flat, but always the same distance away, as if it was being sung just outside her window. From beneath the ground. She moved away 2 weeks later, left no forwarding address, and the house was never resold. The priest never returned. The villagers stopped asking questions, and the prayer, it stopped. But not because it ended, because it completed. It had circled itself fully, closed a loop no one else could see, and that was when the new voice began. Lower. Singular. Almost human. It only sang once. One night. No wind, no birds, no moon. Just a single note. Held for 11 seconds. Flat. Sharp. Then silent, and no one ever heard it again. But 3 days later, someone found an old hymnal leaning against the gate to the convent. It was sealed shut. No title, no number. But pressed inside, on the second page, was a prayer, written backward. In mirror script, identical on both sides, each line folded into the next, and no ending, because the last line was the first line, and beneath it, the same 7 words the boy had spoken, only this time they didn't change. Understood. Here is the fully expanded cinematic horror script for Chapter 4, The Man Who Was Denied Entry, written in the tone, pacing, and structure of Liturgy of Fear. Style narration. Target word count, approximately 1,260. There was no path, only frost. Hardened brush, cracked birch limbs, and the sharp hush of winter pressing against the hills like a held breath. Father Raychard had walked nearly 4 miles through forest that morning, boots soaked, hands raw-guided only by directions from a hand-drawn map, and the promise of a convent that didn't accept visitors. He wasn't sent by the diocese. There was no official request. He brought bread, salt, letters from Krakow, a wooden crucifix for their wall, and something heavier. A warning from the bishop. Deliver. Observe. Do not enter. He didn't ask why. But by the time the chapel came into view, slender and pale, against a backdrop of gray rock, he already knew something was wrong. There were no prints in the snow. No footprints. No wagon marks. No signs of entry or exit. Gate was latched from inside. The brass ring frozen in place. He called out twice. No. Reply. Only the sound of wind passing through the bell tower, carrying nothing but silence. He waited. Then knocked again. A long, slow knock, but nothing stirred. So he waited longer. And that's when he saw it. From the corner of his vision, second floor, left side of the chapel. Movement. At first, just a flicker, like candlelight behind leaded glass. Then, a figure. No face, no clear features, only the silhouette of a woman, kneeling, but not in the direction he expected. She wasn't facing the altar. She was turned away from it, kneeling in reverse. Shoulders rigid. Head bowed. Still. And not alone. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom inside the chapel, he saw more shapes. At least 4 others. Each in identical position. Each knelt backward, their faces toward the far wall, as if worshipping something behind the altar. He waited for one of them to rise. To turn. Too. Explain. None did. They remained fixed, like statues placed without reason. He called out again. The wind caught his voice and pulled it sideways. No movement. He reached for the gate, hoping to force the latch, but it held fast. And the cold bit deeper. That's when he noticed the rope. It hung from the bell tower, old, frayed, swaying slightly, but no bell rang. Not since he arrived. He thought to ring it. To announce himself. The moment his hand touched the rope, he felt warmth. Not heat. Not fire, but warmth, as if someone had held it only seconds before. It was impossible. The air was below freezing. Everything around him had hardened in the frost stone. Rope skin. But this... The rope was soft. Almost damp. He let go, backed away, and for a moment, he thought he heard something. Not a bell, not a voice, a breath from the other side of the gate. He stepped forward, pressing his ear to the wood. Listening. There it was again. Not speech. Not prayer, but movement. Shuffling. A low, dragging motion, like knees against stone. Something was crawling across the floor. Deliberate. Slow. He pulled back, heart pounding, and looked up. They were still kneeling. Unmoving. One of the silhouettes now leaned forward, hands stretched in front, in what looked like prostration. Face to the floor. Arms extended. Not in praise, but surrender. He turned away, began to walk back toward the path, but stopped because he noticed something else. In the snow, to his left, where the outer wall met the ground, a line of melted frost. Thin. Straight. And steaming. As if heat was bleeding from beneath the foundation. He crouched, touched the stone. It burned, only for a second, then went cold again. He didn't speak of it in his report, only scribbled it later in his travel journal, which was found unopened in his rectory years later, after he died. The entry read, "I could not enter, but they were not waiting for me. They were waiting for someone." Inside, no further records exist of his delivery. The food remained untouched, later recovered by a hunter who passed through in April. The letters, unopened. The crucifix, gone. And the women? They were never seen again. No one came to the gate. No reply ever. Arrived from the convent. No mass resumed. But neighbors said something had changed after that. The bell never rang again, not even the false one, and no footprints were seen again in the snow. But each night, at exactly 3:33, a light turned on in the second floor window. Soft. Pale. Unflickering. It stayed lit for 17 minutes. Then vanished. One evening, a local farmer half-drunk walked to the base of the convent and threw a rock toward the window. Nothing happened until the next morning, when his pigs were found dead. Not eaten. Not attacked. Just dead. Laid out in a perfect circle. No blood. No signs of distress. As if they had been called. And followed. The farmer moved away that same month and never spoke of it again. The convent remained sealed, the sisters uncounted, but on the first Friday of every Lent, The same light returned. The same kneeling shadows, visible, still facing the wrong way, and never turning. Never. But every witness reports the same final detail. A moment just before the light disappears. When all 17 figures bow forward. In perfect silence. As if commanded. Of course. Here's the fully expanded cinematic horror script for Chapter 5. The letters that were burned, written precisely in the tone, rhythm, and structure of Liturgy of Fear. Declaration. Word count target, approximately 1,260. The box was discovered by accident. Rusted hinge beneath a broken floor tile. One of the few still intact. The convent had already been abandoned for decades. Windows shattered. Altar half. Collapsed, and the air inside bitter, even in summer. But the basement was drier than expected. A single oil lamp had been lit to survey the damage, and that's when they saw a wedged behind a beam. Blackened canvas, frayed stitching, a satchel, mostly burned, but not completely. Inside ashes, dust, the twisted ends of what may have once been rosary cords, and something else. Half. Burned parchment. Letters. 7 of them, folded and sealed, though the wax had long since cracked away. Each signed, each in the same delicate hand. Sister Ilona, March 1949. No records exist of a Sister Ilona. No. Diocese mentions her name. No burial plot. No entry in the order's registry. And yet her handwriting. It was small, careful, written in a kind of slow obedience. But the contents were not obedient. The first letter opened with a simple line. I cannot speak the prayer anymore. It does not need my mouth. No greeting. No address. As if she were speaking only to the page. As if the act of writing was the prayer itself. The archivist who read them, Dr. Tomasz Vilcik, refused to publish his notes. Only his assistant later described what she had seen. According to her, the letters were not all addressed outward. Some read more like transcripts, fragments of conversations. Some crossed out, others repeated, but always returning to one phrase. It speaks beneath the floor. She described the contents as obsessive, looping, and not structured like madness, but like liturgy. The second letter was shorter and scorched along the edge. Only 2 sentences remained. We are no longer asleep. We do not dream for ourselves now. She underlined the word ourselves. The third was nearly illegible, but one phrase stood out. We stopped chanting aloud last week. The shape does not require it. No one could explain what she meant by the shape, but Ilona referenced it again. In the 4th letter, she wrote, we were taught form, but form is not truth. And when truth arrived, it did not enter through the door. That line was circled. Twice. And beneath it written in smaller, hurried script. It comes from underneath. The 5th letter was the longest, the most intact. And the most disturbing. She described how, each night, the sisters would gather in the chapel, but not to pray, not in words, not in silence, but in a posture none of them had been taught. She called it prostration beyond sleep. She wrote, it bends the back, the knees, the ribs. We feel our breath slow to meet it. We do not sing, but something is heard anyway. And then I woke with soil in my mouth. The archivist stopped reading after that line. He asked his assistant to catalog the rest, but he never entered the convent again. 3 weeks later, he was found unconscious in his apartment, dehydrated, malnourished. Clutching a photograph of the STCHEL. He could not speak when questioned, only murmured the same 3 syllables over and over again. Os.V ID.Ri. It has no translation. It does not appear in scripture, and yet, according to the 6th letter, Ilona claimed it was older than blessing. She wrote, we are not naming it, we are remembering it. And when we remember together, the floor becomes thinner. And then, the most chilling passage. Last night, we placed our ears to the stone. What we heard was not the past. It was the next part. The assistant described this letter as the only one that sounded hopeful. But hope, in this context, did not comfort Dotted unsettled, because the next morning, the assistant went missing. The letters were sealed in a diocesan archive, and the satchel burned completely, on official order, but photos of the fragments survived. And among them, a piece of linen. Stained. Written upon. One final message. This is not a convent. It is a mouth, and we are learning how to open it. No one knows what became of Sister Ilona. No matching DNA. No record of a transfer, but one report dated weeks after the last letter mentions unmarked woman seen wandering the woods north of the convent. Shoeless. Eyes open too wide, mouth moving, but no sound. When approached, she placed her hand against the soil. Then whispered a line not from scripture, but from the burned letters. The shape does not require sound, and vanished into the trees. They never found her again. But beneath the chapel, where the letters were discovered, the stone has begun to crack. Hairline, fractures. Thin as veins, leading nowhere, and widening. Of course. Here's the full cinematic horror script for Chapter 6. The burial ritual, written precisely in the calm, disturbing tone of Liturgy of Fear. Style narration, and matching the ~1,260. Word target. There was no congregation. No funeral garments. No incense. Just silence. And stones. It was October of 1950. The convent bell did not ring, and yet the parish ledger lists an entry that day, a ceremony held at dusk. No names of attendees. No officiant noted. Just one phrase, written in older script: Thy will in, weight and stone. The document was unsigned, but the page directly before had been torn out. The paper still clung to the binding. Shreds of something. Erased. Removed. Still bleeding ink into the leather. 3 weeks earlier, villagers had reported a low sound at night. Something like humming, but irregular, broken at the ends, like breath catching in the throat. And then the delivery began. A cart, drawn by mule, covered in cloth. Witnesses say it arrived after sundown. When the road turned to Frost. It stopped at the base of the convent hill. The driver never looked up. He did not enter the gates. He simply left the cart in place, turned the mule around, and walked away. The cloth was never removed in daylight, but the sisters came for it. 4 of them got barefoot. Their dresses were plain, but their heads uncovered a sign of violation, not humility. They each took a corner of the cloth. And when they lifted its stones, 13 of them got rough. Uneven, heavy, enough to require both arms. Each one marked, but not with dates, not with initials. With names, carved in reverse. As if intended to be read through something. Or from underneath. Only 3 names have been deciphered, each traced by hand in graphite. Decades later, each untraceable. No parishioner had borne them. No monastic registry matched, and one name was not a name at all. Just 5 consonants. No vowels. Too angular to be Latin, too old to be anything else. TSHRN. The stone was the heaviest. It took 2 sisters to carry it. The record indicates that no burial was performed, but an internal report, written decades later during a short. Lived investigation, claimed that all 13 stones were placed at the foot of the altar. No candles were lit. No songs were sung. Only the sound of stone scraping, stone. And breathing from those who watched. From below. The central slab beneath the altar had been loosened. A shallow cavity revealed. Not large enough for a casket. Only depth. And when the stones were placed in, one by one, the sisters whispered something, but their lips did not move in time with their voices. As if the sound was coming before the breath. And when the final stone was set down, a silence so full it sounded alive. Then, a single tone, not from above. Not from any bell, but from within the stone itself. A resonance that no one remembered hearing, but everyone remembered feeling. It hummed in the teeth, vibrated beneath the knees, lasted no more than a second, but it stayed. It stayed in the marrow. In the quiet between sounds. And by morning, the stone slab had sealed itself again. No mortar. No chisel marks. Just smoothness. Unbroken. The convent's chapel was closed to outsiders the next day. The gates remained locked for 2 years, and when the bell was rung again, it sounded different. Lower. As though it had gained weight. One archivist, Father Richard Bila, tried to revisit the record. Decades later, he had read the entry in the parish log. He had seen the rough sketch of the stones drawn in the margin, and he had found a second, hidden note. Written sideways along the spine of the page. One line, almost childlike in tone. They were not names. They were instructions. The ink was different, thinner, rust. Colored. And beneath it faint markings, as though someone had written another phrase and tried to scratch it out. The indentations were shallow, but with angled light, Bila made out fragments. We go in one by one. He did not sleep for days. He returned to the convent grounds, which by then were mostly collapsed, but the altar remained intact. He described its surface as slightly warm, even in the snow. He claimed he heard something faint from below. Not movement. Not music, but breath, coming not in or out, but around. As if breath itself had become the structure. And that's when he noticed the ground. Where the frost had settled in perfect lines. 13 of them, leading not toward the chapel, doors, but away. As if whatever had been placed beneath the altar was not meant to stay. 2 weeks later, Bila disappeared. The keys to the diocesan archive were found in his car. The driver's seat was empty. Only the passenger door was open. And inside on the leather seat, a stone. Palm. Sized. No inscription. Only a mark. Not too shallow to be carved. More like pressed from within. As if something had tried to push outward. A half. Formed letter, or a mouth. No official report was filed, but one internal memo circulated through the church's preservation office. No further inquiry into the 1950 ledger. Stones returned. Ceremony confirmed. Meaning unknown. But meaning was never the point. The ritual was not made to be understood, only performed. And performed again, because just months ago, a maintenance worker returned from the site, had gone to assess the chapel's remaining structure for historical review. But he returned, pale, disoriented. He refused to speak until days later. When asked what he saw, he said only this: "I know my name, but I saw it written wrong. It was on a stone, and it was waiting. The stone has not been recovered, but the earth around the altar has begun to shift. Minute tremors, barely measurable. Just enough to loosen the gravel. And reveal more names. Still backward, still waiting. Still breathing. Certainly." Here's the full cinematic horror narration for Chapter 7, The Earth That Shifted, written in the exact tone, structure, and pacing of Liturgy of Fear, matched precisely to a tilde 1,260. Word segment. It began with a sound no one could place. Not thunder, not wind. Just pressure, like the world had inhaled and held it. It was July of 1934, a dry summer. Crops gone yellow at the edge. The soil split in places, like seams showing through a skin. The convent had long since shuttered its outer gates. No one had seen the sisters in years, but the bell still rang on Sundays. Always. Once. Always at noon. Until the night the ground moved. No earthquake was recorded. No fault line had ever touched that stretch of land. But just before midnight, a shudder ran through the lower fields. Not violent, not loud, but unmistakable, enough to rattle the shutters. On the homes just outside the wood line. Enough to wake a child on the edge of sleep. Farmer named Krzysztof Mershinik was the first to step outside. He had no explanation for what he saw, just a single phrase he repeated later to the mayor. The ground was wrong. The field nearest the convent was no longer flat. A wide circle, about 12 feet across, had risen several inches above the rest of the soil. not like a mound, but like the earth beneath had shifted. Upward, the grass was unbroken. The weeds, bent, not torn. As if the land had lifted from within. Quietly. Evenly. The circle stayed like that for 2 days. And then it began to sink. Slowly, at first millimeters, over hours. By the second night, the center had depressed nearly a foot. The ring remained. But now it was concave. No water pooled. No erosion traced the shape. Just dust and heat and a smell, not of rot, but of metal and candle wax. And then came the bells, 3 of them, rung at precise intervals, exactly 6 seconds apart. No one had touched the rope. The chapel tower, locked since 1919, showed no signs of entry. But the sound echoed for miles. Recorded by 2 witnesses. Both confirmed the pitch. It wasn't the original bell. It was deeper. Like something newer had been installed. Or older. Mershinick returned to the field the next morning, but the circle was gone, completely flat. No depression, no ridge, no marks of movement, except one thing. The weeds in the center, about a meter across, had turned gray. Not wilted, not burned, just drained. As if the color had seeped out from below. He placed his hand on the soil and said it felt warm. As if something had passed through and left part of itself behind. The warmth didn't fade until dusk, and when it did, the chapel bell rang once more, but only halfway. It stopped mid. Swing. The sound broken in the throat, and then silence for weeks. Until a letter arrived, not from the diocese, not from the state, but from a name no one recognized, signed only Sister E. It contained no greeting, no date. Only one line, written in ink the color of rust. We have begun again. The letter was archived, but never followed up. And then it disappeared, pulled from the folder without. Signed. Out. Only the envelope remains, stamped with a return. Address that does not exist on any map. But hand. Drawn coordinates, scribbled on the back, led directly to the center of that same field. And that's where they found the stone. Smaller than the others, not placed, just barely showing through the topsoil, like it had surfaced on its own. A name on it was too eroded to read. But beneath, it scratched in much finer marks. A date. 7.13.34. The same night the tremor was felt, but that was not the date of a burial. No death was recorded. No funeral held. No entry in any registry. It was, however, the birthday of a young girl born in the next town over, Alexandra Kowalska. She was healthy. Quiet. But rarely spoke, until age 7, when her parents found her kneeling in the backyard, digging in the dirt. She said she was listening for the names. They pulled her away. She didn't resist. But that night, she screamed in her sleep. The only phrase they could make out: the bell's not for church anymore. She was institutionalized 2 years later. Doctors called it a form of echolalia, a language loop, but her speech grew more coherent over time. And always centered on the same image, a circle with soil that moved. She died at 20.3. Cause unknown, but a nurse attending her final hours said her body turned cold. Not gradually, but instantly. Like warmth had been cold from inside. Not out. In exhumation years later found the soil in her casket wet. Despite no sign of water. And the young They inside of the lid, marked. Not carved. Pressed. With a ring 12 inches across, exactly matching the one from 1934. Her name was later found in the margins of an unofficial registry kept by the convent's last known archivist, but it was written backward and repeated 13 times. Each in different handwriting. One version looked like a child's, but another had no human curve. The letters were rigid, bent too, straight to be organic. As if the hand that wrote them had no wrist. Just angle. And pressure. To this day, that field produces nothing. No crops take root. No trees survive. But if you walk the edges at dusk, you'll hear something beneath your feet. Not voices, not music, but vibration, like something large turning. And waiting, certainly. Here's the full cinematic horror narration for Chapter 8, The Priest's Final Visit, written in the precise tone, rhythm, and structure of Liturgy of Fear. With a total word count of approximately 1,260, the gate had rusted over by then. The hinges no longer turned. The latch had fused where rainwater had settled for too many winters. But Father Marek did not need it to open. He stepped through the overgrowth at dawn, and the gate simply parted, as if it had never been closed. There was no official reason for his visit, no orders from the diocese, no blessing from his superior, just an entry in his personal journal from the night before. I heard it again, the sound between prayers. He packed no bag. He told no one where he was going, but parishioners remembered seeing him that morning, clean vestments, bare hands, no cross, only a silver key looped around his wrist. The chapel had been abandoned for decades, its bell long silenced, its chapel doors barred with thick oak beams. But Marek did not approach the chapel. He went around, to the side grounds, where the crypt once opened beneath, a sloped patch of land, ringed by elder trees that had grown in a perfect circle, each branch touching the next like clasped fingers. The path down had eroded, stone steps split by moss and time. But Marek did not hesitate. He moved like he had walked it before, though no record shows he had. And yet, his personal Bible contained notes in its margins, dated years earlier, verses with annotations, references to echoes, and beneath Psalm 94-11, a single word, below. He was last seen by a groundskeeper at a nearby monastery, who reported the silhouette of a man descending into the earth around 6:15. A He never came back up. The crypt was locked. No one followed. It wasn't until 4 days later that a group of brothers, searching for a lost lamb, stumbled across the stone arch, and found the door open, not broken, not forced, just ajar. A faint scent wafted from within, not rot, not incense, but something sour and familiar, like breath held too long in a tight room. They entered together, 3 men. Only 2 came back out. The third brother, Joshek, refused to speak. He did not blink, did not flinch. He was found hours later, curled beneath the monastery altar, his fingertips pressed into his ears. He whispered only one line, "They're not dead." The others described what they saw. A corridor no longer straight. The walls had buckled, bent inward like something had leaned from behind, and in the final chamber, a man standing motionless, barefoot, vestments soiled from the knees down, his head tilted slightly, not in prayer, but as if listening. He did not speak until touched, and then only 5 words. "They are still singing." He was brought to St. Wojciech's sanatorium under heavy sedation, refused all food for 7 days. Doctors diagnosed him with catatonic trauma, likely caused by extreme environmental exposure, but his vitals never dropped. His pulse was slow, but steady, and he did not blink for 30.6 hours. When finally coaxed into speech, he asked for paper. He wrote a single paragraph in precise, almost mechanical script. There were 17 voices, the same, but not. As if from one throat with many mouths, they circled the sound, and then I was inside it. He never wrote again, but in his cell, something strange occurred. The lights flickered at sunset, always at sunset, never sunrise, and always precisely 17 times, no fault was found in the circuitry. Eventually, he was moved to an isolated wing, and it was there that a nurse found him one evening standing, again barefoot, facing the wall, hands outstretched, not touching, mouthing words without voice. When she approached, she heard a sound not from his lips, but from beneath the floor. A low hum, not electronic, not vocal, rhythmic, like chanting done with breath alone. She pressed her ear to the tiles and felt something move. Not a vibration dot, but pressure dot like something, shifting its weight beneath the concrete. She never returned. 2 weeks later, Father Marek vanished from his room. The door, locked from the outside. No security breach. No forced. Exit. Just empty sheets. And on the wall, where he had faced, a mark, a crescent shape, drawn in what appeared to be wax, but chemically identical to sebum. Skin oil. Human. And in the center, a symbol. Not of the church. Not of any known faith, but a spiral. Inward. Never touching itself, with 17 notches along its curve, each one aligned to a specific psalm. Each song referencing descent. Not damnation, but burial. Private investigation was opened by the Archdiocese. No records have been made public, but one file misfiled into a civil archive contains a photo dated 2 months after Marek's disappearance. The image shows a small chapel in the woods. Door ajar. Inside, a man in vestments, not quite facing the altar, not quite turning away, but still. Motionless. And around him, dust suspended in beams of light. As if hanging. Mid. Breath. No official confirmation was given, but the face, when enhanced, matches Marek's last known ID, except he appears older. Much older, though only 9 weeks had passed, and his hands are not empty. In one, he holds a hymnal. In the other, a stone. Not large, but carved, with a name, one that had not appeared on any convent registry, but did match a small grave outside Krakow. A girl, age 12, missing since 1911. The stone had been removed from her resting place 2 years prior for restoration, but the rest of her plot remained untouched. No coffin. No bones. Only wax, melted and pooled beneath the surface. The same material found on Marek's wall. When asked where he had gone, what he had seen, what he heard, Marek only repeated the phrase, "They are still singing." But no one asked who they were, because by then, it didn't matter. Of course. Here's the full cinematic narration for Chapter 9, The Convent That Wasn't There, written in the exact structure, tone, and pace of Liturgy of Fear, matched to a word count of approximately 1,260. The forest does not grow the same around the convent grounds. Its trees veer outward, as if pushed gently over time by something just beneath the soil. Nothing lush thrives inside the perimeter. No wildflowers, no moss, no birdsong. Just thorn. Thick brush. And stone. Cold stone. Always cold. Even in the peak of summer, when the earth around it softens in heat, the outer walls of the convent remain untouched by warmth. In 1958, the Polish Cartographic Survey dispatched aerial photographers across the region. The aim was purely logistical, documenting terrain for agriculture, trade, and border assessment. Records from that year list 47 flights over the Gmina-Rapszis area. Flight 23 passed directly over the convent grounds. But no structure appears in the photographs. Just field, interrupted only by a strange distortion in the shadow's 4 points, angled inwards, forming a cross that wasn't there in the light. Anomalous terrain? Fault in the film? The team assumed so. But on the second pass, taken 3 days later, the pattern changed. The cross shape had shifted, now bent, like the arms had turned slightly clockwise. As if realigned. And in the center, a new blotch of shadow. Not black, not defined. Just darker than it should have been. Worse still, that patch held motion blur, but no object had moved. There were no birds. No trees tall enough to cast it. No explanation was entered into the survey log. Only a red stamp over the sheet. Topography. Not for public distribution. It wasn't. Revisited until 1961. A local professor, Andrzej Konarski, requested the original negatives while researching Christian landmarkers in southeast Poland. What he found disturbed him enough to initiate private correspondence with 2 institutions, the Krakow Diocesan Office and the Polish Geological Authority. Both declined to investigate further, but a note in his journal, now archived, reads, "There is no building in the images, but there is weight." Konarski later visited the site himself. His field notes are careful. Clinical temperatures, soil density, humidity dot until the final page, where the writing shifts, dot hastens, dot misspells, dot double quotes cold. It's buried in cold, stone like unbreathed breath. I stepped near the north edge and something bent beneath me. Not broke, bent, like a hollow shell with tension. He did not return. His family reported a change in him. He spoke less, watched the floor while walking. He would often pause at doorways and whisper before entering. Not words, just a tone. Low, matching his steps. As if marking rhythm with unseen walls. He died of stroke 2 years later, but his wife claimed that on his final night, he had taken out the old aerial photographs and lined them across their kitchen floor. Laid them in a cross and fell asleep kneeling in its center. But something wasn't right. The next morning, all 4 photos had warped. Not torn, not crumpled. Warped. As if pressed unevenly from below. Modern satellite scans of the convent site confirm the structure's presence. Today walls, roof, minor damage along the southern archway. The stone appears intact, but no date has been recorded for its construction, and no aerial image. Then or now shows it from above. Not clearly. It's always partially obscured. By cloud. By glare. By something misaligned in the lens itself. One researcher who attempted a drone scan noted that his GPS data became unreadable within 20 meters of the tower. He brought the drone back manually. The video captured from above flickered. Only for 4 seconds. But in those frames, the building shifts. As if pulled slightly off. Center. By 1 degree. And the roof, no longer symmetrical. Tilted toward the forest line. He filed no further reports, but left a forum comment months later under a pseudonym. I swear it moved. Most dismiss it as software error. Compression glitch, parallax, warping, but a former archivist from the National Mapping Bureau claimed she saw the originals herself decades earlier, and she said something else. In all the archived photos, in the ones where the building doesn't appear, there's still shadow, not cast from above, not logically explainable. Just presence. She described it this way: it's like seeing where something is not, but knowing something was. When a heat map was taken of the site in 2004 during a geological study, the entire area measured consistent temperature, except for the chapel itself. Its interior walls registered 9 degrees Celsius, but the stone surrounding the altar, 4 degrees Celsius. No airflow, no refrigeration. No cause. And even more disturbing, there was no change. Not over time. Not across season. The stone remained cold. Always. As if untouched by the surface. World. As if somewhere beneath it remained connected to something. Deeper. Older. Not dead, but waiting. Those who have stood there describe a stillness. Not peaceful, but pressurized. Silence that resists sound, that pushes back when you speak. And sometimes, just as the sun slips behind the line of elder trees, your shadow bends the wrong way. Not dramatically. Not enough to panic. Just enough to make you pause. Just enough to feel it. That something beneath you is adjusting. Shifting. And on the oldest aerial photo, one shadow, the crooked cross, stretches too far in one direction, right to the edge of the page. And in its reach, you can almost see fingers. Thin. Pressed together, facing down. Waiting for the bell to toll. Certainly. Here's the full cinematic narration for Chapter 10, The Mass That Continues, written in the precise tone, rhythm, and structure of Liturgy of Fear, with a word count of approximately 1,260. In the final light before dusk, the hill is still. Birdsong tapers. The wind folds down into the grass. And the air, that shallow stretch just above the soil, begins to feel. Watch. The path up to the convent no longer exists on maps. Even the locals refer to it only vaguely. Beyond, the third ridge, they'll say, where the brush won't part unless it wants to. And if you arrive too early, it's silent. If you arrive too late, it's gone. But at exactly 8 minutes before sunset, something begins. Not a noise, not at first dot, just the feeling that something's being recited. That time is folding inward on a sentence. You haven't heard yet dot, and then you'll hear it. Not song, not chant, but sound, a breath, pressed through lips that do not part. The rhythm doesn't rise. It doesn't swell. It doesn't move to a resolution. Dot it loops. Like a rosary rung too tight around the throat. Dot witnesses call it a chant. But there is no melody. Dot only cadence. Only the suggestion of voices behind the trees. Some report hearing Latin. Others hear nothing specific, just tone. And heat and cold. All at once. Dot. And if you kneel just briefly, just to rest, some say, that's when it happens. That's when you feel it. The breath. Dot soft. Dot just behind your ear. Not warm. Dot but present. Dot and not wind. Wind doesn't move like that. One visitor, a doctoral student researching Slavic ecclesiastical ruins, came alone in April of 2012. He recorded audio for 41 minutes. When he returned to Warsaw, he played it back, but there was nothing. Dot no chant. Dot no voice. Only a sound like distant cloth shifting in water. Dot until minute 28. There, barely audible, came 4 syllables. Repeated. Always the same. Dot his name. Spoken in a voice that matched none of his reference samples. Dot it had the tone of a woman, but aged, hoarse, with something behind the breath, like dust being drawn from stone. He never returned to the site. He left Poland the following year. Dot but posted once in an hour. Dot defunct forum under an anonymous profile. It doesn't want to be found. It wants to be completed. Others have heard it too. Locals, hikers, a forestry agent who said he stepped into the clearing and immediately knew something was midway through happening. He described the air as viscous, described his vision blurring slightly, not at the edges, but in the middle, as though someone had placed a wet thumb over his pupil. He said he turned to leave, but couldn't remember which way he had come. The trees didn't match, and the light didn't move. And that's when he heard it, a single word, spoken in 2 directions. Once behind him. Once inside him. He walked until morning. And when he reached the main road, he found a single object in his coat pocket, a strip of paper. On it, 1 word, written backward, in graphite. Vo tvm. Thou. He still keeps it. It has no memory of how it got there. The structure itself, what remains of the convent, is reduced now to bones. Hways caved. Bell tower collapsed. Yet some claim the sound originates from beneath it. Below the altar, beyond where the crypt once stood. And some say it doesn't come from the convent at all. They say it comes through it. As if the chant were never sung in this world, but was meant to echo into it. And the voices? Never learned. Only remembered. One researcher, who spent 18 nights recording near the site, claimed the pattern of the sound matched no known choral structure. She likened it to trying to translate the shape of a candle's flame. She began having dreams. Always the same. She stands at the base of a staircase, descending slowly. The steps are not stone. They are ribbed, organic. She hears no voices in the dream, only absence. And one night she didn't wake. Her colleagues found her 2 days later in her car, parked half a kilometer from the site. Alive. But silent. She hasn't spoken since. When asked what she remembers, she writes only, "It's not finished." Some speculate it's a mass, one that began long ago, a prayer spoken not to something, but for something that the sisters weren't worshiping. They were completing a ritual that can't be undone, only fulfilled, and perhaps still is. At dusk, when the breath curls against your skin, and the chant begins with no melody and no end. You are not being warned, you are being counted, a witness, a voice not yet joined. Some believe it waits for the kneel. Others say it begins the moment you stop looking for sound and begin listening for rhythm. And others, those who've gone alone and returned visibly thinner, quieter, unable to name the day of the week, they say something else. They say it doesn't sing to you. It remembers you. And one day, when the breath behind your ear speaks your name, it's not calling you forward. It's calling you back. They believed their silence was sacred. They believed burying themselves would bring peace to the world above. But some faiths do not end. They only deepen. Next time, the orphan who drew maps of crypts he'd never seen